Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at the B&W Underbed installation kit for companion fifth wheel hitches on a 2020 Ford F250. So this is going to be great to use for a B&W companion fifth wheel kit. Now that is sold separately, but one of the great things is you can flip this around and still use it as a gooseneck ball. Having the versatility to be able to tow two different trailers with one kit is really nice, especially for something that is kind of a workhorse here. And you know, at any point you can swap this over and hook up to whatever trailer you need to. With a 3/4 ton truck, it's really nice to be able to use the utility of it. And when you have a fifth wheel gooseneck, it's really gonna open that up with bumping that gross trailer weight to 30,000 pounds. So that's gonna cover your campers or your heavy gooseneck trailers, so you can actually use your truck, and rather than relying on just a hitch to pull, this is gonna bump that up quite a bit. Now you also have a vertical tongue weight, and that's gonna be 7,500 pounds. So this can hold quite a bit. Now you can see here, the ball is able to be turned over. So that's one thing a lot of times with goosenecks is a lot of people say, well, you lose having the ability to use your bed. Well, that's not the case here, because you can simply turn this over, drop it in place, and it's essentially flush. Even your safety chain loops here, spring loaded, so they're gonna pull them down and keep this nice and flat. And then whenever you're ready to tow, you simply pull this out. It's got a nice little handle there. Drop that in place, latch it on the side, and you're ready to go. Overall, the kit, while during the install, I noticed is very high quality. The instructions are straightforward. All the hardware is very high quality. The fit and finish is nice. So that's kind of what makes the B&W stand out from other fifth wheel kits for your truck. So the installation, obviously, you do have to cut some holes. You are under your truck quite a bit. So if you don't have a lift, it can probably get a little tricky if you're doing this at home on the ground, but I'm hoping that step by step I can walk you through it and make your installation as easy as possible. So now let's take a look at that. To begin our installation, we're going to lower our spare tire, and that's going to gain us a lot more access when installing the gooseneck. Our next step is going to be measuring the distance in the instruction manual back. So we're going to start by measuring here and using those numbers they gave us in the instructions to mark where our hole will be. I'm also going to make sure that we're centered from side to side, so I'm going to go in between the fender wells here. You're going to see potentially that the factory dimple, which normally designates where that drill mark would be, this one's actually offset a little further back, so definitely do your measurements that they recommend in the instructions before making any holes. So now we're going to take our 4-inch hole saw and we're going to go ahead and make our drill here. Nice little pilot with my bit. So now once you have that cut, we're going to go through and file this down to get all those burrs off and any rough edges. Then I'm going to come back with a little clear enamel here, and you can use any paint that you have just to kind of coat that raw surface there. So since this is a white bed, I'm going to use a little clear. If you have a bed liner, you can use black. Just kind of any paint that you have handy, just kind of coat this edge. So now our next step is going to be loosening up the bracket for the exhaust. It'll drop out of the way. I am also going to remove the heat, or the spare tire heat shield, and I think that's going to help anyone that's not working on the lifts. It's also going to help myself. So there's 3 13mm nuts here. So you got one, and there's 2 on the back side. We're going to go ahead and pull those off. And you're going to want to keep all of your hardware nice and organized. That way when you go back to put it all up, everything's there and you're not searching for one piece of hardware. Next, I'm going to be lowering the exhaust down on this back end here, and you have 4 10mm bolts. You have 2 on each side, so go ahead and take those down, and the exhaust should lower down. Okay, that's gonna probably give us just enough play, and if we need to, when we raise this in place, to move this down. So now I'm going to be putting my side plates in, and you're gonna see the B&W sticker facing outward. Now, the passenger and driver side are two different lengths, so your passenger side will be shorter, and your driver side one will actually have the sticker for how to use the handles. So take your 1/2-inch hardware with a flat washer, and you're gonna feed that through here. You can go ahead and put the other one on the other side as well. You can see our hardware poking from the outside. So we're on the inside of the frame rail here, and in the kit there is a side bracket that you can install, but some trucks actually come with these factory installed. So if that's the case, you can set these side brackets aside. Now on the back side of our bolts, we're going to use our large flat washer, and then followed by a lock washer, and then the nut. We can go ahead and just hand tight those into place for now. Now we're going to go ahead and repeat our same process on the driver's side. The next step is going to be to take our handle, and we're going to feed it here. I'm on the driver's side, right about there. And that's going to allow us a little bit later to have that in place to make it a little bit easy for us. So now we have our cross member brackets, and what I've done is laid them out as how they're going to fit on the truck, and that's just going to be a little bit easier to visually see where they're going to go. Now in the kit we do have these threaded bushings, and you're going to see there is a flat spot on top, and the openings on the cross member plate actually have a indentation here, so that's going to kind of fit in there with that flat spot. And you might be able to pop it in with your hands just to kind of get it in place, just like that. And then you're going to want to go back with just a small hammer and just slightly tap that down so it's flush. And you can go ahead and do that to all of the brackets. So now I'm going to start with my passenger cab side bracket here, and really it's pretty simple. It's going to just have this back plate will go on the front side of your side plates, and you're going to want to kind of just work that into there. I have to wobble it around a little bit, but you're trying to get those threaded bushings to line up with the hole, so you have one on the outside of the frame and one on the inside. From there, you're going to take your thread locked supplied bolts in the hardware kit, and you're going to hand tight those in place. I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same process on the other 3 brackets, and just make sure you take your time and make sure you're putting the correct bracket in the right spot. So next we have our front cross member, and this is going to join between the front brackets that we just put up. You also have this spacer plate here. So the way to line it up properly, you're going to see inside where the weld is, and you're going to want that facing up and your bracket facing towards you. So this is going to go in between those brackets, and then we're going to feed our 4" by 5/8 hardware through here. So I'm going to get one started, and then we'll get the rest going. So you're going to see the brackets are offset. So we have this one kind of facing towards us open, and then this one's a little closed face. So we'll just slide this like so, and I'm going to feed the furthest most hole. So I'll take my 5/8 bolt. I'm going to make sure that goes through our spacer plate, and then from there I'm going to feed it in through the hole. Now I'm going to put my split washer there and follow it up with the nut. Just a hand tight there. And I'm going to grab the same hardware that I used here and put it on our next hole. Our driver side will be a little bit different here. We're going to feed it on the furthest most hole. So in your kit, you're going to find this little spacer washer. Place that first, then follow it up with your lock washer, and then your nut. So now we're going to do a rear cross member, and that's actually it's gonna sandwich in this gap here between the brackets and the actual bar of the bed. So this should just slide in just like that. And you're gonna be using your 1.5" by 5/8. You're gonna be using a flat washer, and then a split washer. And with your hardware in the correct orientation, just go ahead and feed that through, and you're going to be able to thread that in. Once you have that threaded in by hand, we're going to repeat this same process on this hole as well as the two on the other side. Now, before putting our center section in place, these are threaded and they have this nice coating, but they kind of get in the threads at times. So to make things a little bit easier for at least hand threading and tighten it down later on, I'm going to hit this with a little bit of penetrating oil, and then what I'll do is take my supplied bolt here and I'm just going to run it through. Once I get it hand threaded on, I'm going to run it through with an impact just a few times, and that's going to loosen up that coating and make it a lot easier for us. In preparation for lifting our center section, I'm going to take our 1/2 inch by 4 inch bolts here and just kind of feed them to where they're almost have a little bit sticking out, and that's going to be really helpful if you're doing this by yourself. If you have an extra set of hands and you want to grab them for some help, that might be ideal. But if you're by yourself, you can also do it this way. And then, so once we lift it in place, we'll align it and we can just pop those in, and that's going to hold this section up. Looking at the orientation of the hitch, we want our handle here facing our driver's side. So make sure you do have that over here when putting it in place. Now, these are the 4 holes that we're going to take those bolts that we put in place and drop them in. And I'm also going to grab my shorter hardware here, and that way I can thread one of these in to hold it in place and make it hands-free after the first step. I'll sandwich these two between the front and rear cross member. Just like that. It might take a little bit of wiggling in place here because you do have that bracket, but there we go. Once through, line your holes up, and then you can just pop these in place. And now that front's held, I'm going to take my small bolt and just hand thread it in just for now to hold that in place. So now where our 4 bolts are poking out, we're going to just put our flat washers on first. And then we're going to follow it up with a split washer. And then finally with our nut. You can go ahead and put those in place on all 4, just hand tightening them. So coming back with our 1/2 inch by 1.5 inch bolts, you can see that I put a lock washer as well as my flat washer. We'll go ahead and thread these in place. And once you have those 3 in place, you can actually take this holding bolt and do the same with the hardware. So during the installation, you might have noticed that we've hand tightened everything. And the reason being is because you want this to align perfectly with the hole drilled. Ours is pretty close, but if you're going to be doing an install like this, do it right one time and you shouldn't have any issues. So to pull this up, if you have maybe a rafter or a beam that you can attach to, that's awesome. Maybe a chain hoist, but if you don't have that, that's fine. You can use a couple blocks of wood, and we're going to kind of triangulate this a little bit. Using our cam buckle strap here, I've hooked them both on the center of the receiver, and we're just going to cinch this down, and that's going to, see, as you can see, raise that up, and I'm able to kind of move this to align it to where exactly I need it. And that way, when we go to tighten things down, it's exactly where we want it to stay, up top. So now we're going to start tightening down our hardware since this is in place where we want it to be. And there is a specific process, and that way it tightens up properly. And the first ones we're going to be attacking are going to be the 8 from the center section bolting up. So you're going to need a 3/4 inch. I recommend an impact driver, and then you're also going to need a socket for the back side, or at least a wrench to hold it in place. So I'm going to try to get in here. Now go over to the other side, and that way it kind of balances it out. Now you're going to tighten down the 4 on the backside bracket. Now, we won't really need to crank these down super tight because we are going to go back with our torque wrench, so you want to be sure not to over torque them, but tight enough with a ratcheting wrench or a socket should be plenty. Next, grab your 3/4 inch socket, and I'm using a 1/2 inch impact, and we're going to go to these thread lock bolts on the passenger inside. We'll go ahead and tighten those up. So once you tighten your first bolt here, and that's going to be right next to this little bump stop, we're going to actually go in a diagonal pattern. So we're going to go to this back one here, and then once we tighten that up, we're going to crisscross over. So let me tighten this up real quick. Now I'm going to move over to my forward facing bolt, and then once that's tightened, we'll crisscross back over to this one here. So next we're going to be tightening our larger 5/8 bolts that attach to our front cross member to the brackets up top. Now I'm going to tighten up the bolts that attach our side plates, and finally we'll be doing our thread lock bolts on the outside. After tightening hardware down, I'm just double checking to make sure that our alignment is still correct. You don't want to be tightening everything down and have it crooked at the end only to have to go back. And now I'm going to go back with my torque wrench and set it to the specifications in the instruction manual. Now, between the 2 size bolts, there are 2 different torque settings. So you might knock out all the big ones first and then adjust your torque setting back down for the little ones after. Now with everything tightened down and torqued to spec, I can now remove or loosen up my cam buckle strap, and we can set this aside. Now we have our handle fed through here, and you're going to see there's the square holes here, and that's going to be for our carriage bolts that drop in the top. Now to make this a little bit easier, you're going to want to lock this in place, and so it does hold in place, but just so it doesn't jerk forward or pinch you or anything, you might place something, maybe an Allen wrench or whatever, that way it kind of locks that in place for the time being. So now you can feed these bolts into those other squares, and then go with your flanged nuts here and go ahead and hand tighten those down for now. And I'm just going to take my 13mm and I'm going to just tighten it up enough to take a little bit of that slop out. I'm not going to completely tighten it. I've taken that pin out here, so what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and release this, and we're going to be checking to make sure we have clearances. You can see there's wire looms here. Ford's done a pretty good job of keeping those out of the way, but we also want to make sure that there's no other hindrances that could cause this to rub against or bind up. So take a look underneath the frame and make sure there's nothing else binding. So we look like we are clear. I don't have anything rubbing against that handle, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten this down. So now we're going to drill our 4 holes for our safety chain hooks. Now we are going to run a small 1/4 inch drill bit underneath. You want to make it as perpendicular as possible. That way it's not crooked when you're drilling the larger hole. I do recommend putting on safety glasses so you don't get aluminum in your eye. So now we have our 4 pilot holes drilled. We're going to go ahead back with a 1/2 inch bit to enlarge those to allow for these to drop in. So I suggest grabbing one of these U-bolts, and that way you can test fit to see if you need to drill out any more. But let's go ahead and enlarge these out. So once you have that fitting, you're going to want to pull this back out. We're going to file these edges down and then hit that with some clear coat. That way it's not going to corrode. And then You'll just repeat that same process on the other side. Now before I spray my clear coat, I'm actually going to vacuum up all my aluminum shavings, and that way they don't get stuck in the clear coat. And then once that's dry, you can drop your safety chain loops in, and then we'll go back to the bottom side of the vehicle. So now we'll be installing our conical springs on the U-bolts themselves. So make it a nice little tornado shape there, and then go back with your nut. You're going to want to tighten this down to where this is flush with the bottom of the bolt. Perfect. Now go ahead and repeat that same process on the other three. So I've gone ahead and put my heat shield and my spare tire back up in place. So now all that's left to do, drop the ball in, latch it up, and get to towing. And that was a look and installation of the B&W Underbed installation kit for companion fifth wheel hitches.